My father publicly disowned me at our family party. So I cut ties, walked out, and rebuilt my life from scratch. They say your life can change in an instant. One word, one decision, one moment that shatters the reality you thought you knew. For me, that moment arrived disguised as a celebration, amidst the clinking glasses and forced smiles of my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. But before we get to the explosion, you need to understand the pressure that had been building beneath the surface for years. The quiet erosion of self that happens when you become the invisible foundation holding everyone else up. My name's Ethan, 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my primary role in the family wasn't son or brother, but the fixer. Got a leaky pipe in the middle of the night? Dad's car making a funny noise again? Brother Daniel need another loan to float his perpetually failing business ideas? Sister Lauren having yet another meltdown because her latest boyfriend turned out to be, shockingly, unreliable? Call Ethan. Good old Ethan. He'll sort it out. He always does. We lived in one of those sprawling suburban houses just outside Chicago, the kind that looks perfectly pleasant from the curb, but inside feels cramped with unspoken tensions and the weight of expectation. My parents, Robert and Diane, weren't monsters. They were worse. They were masters of subtle manipulation. Dad wielded disappointment like a weapon, framing every demand as a question of my loyalty, my worthiness. Mom specialized in the passive-aggressive, sigh. The comment coated in faux sweetness that somehow always left me feeling small and indebted. "Oh, Ethan will handle the yard work this weekend, won't you, dear? Your father's back has been acting up and you're just so capable with those things." Those things usually meant the tasks no one else wanted to do. My siblings, well, they learned by example. Daniel, the eldest after me, saw me as a walking, talking line of credit. Lauren, perpetually caught in self-inflicted drama, viewed me as her on-call therapist and emergency fund. Jessica kept mostly to herself, surfacing only for favors. Only Chloe, my youngest sister, still navigating the treacherous waters of high school, seemed to see past the role. Sometimes, across the dinner table, her eyes would meet mine with a flash of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the absurdity. But she was too young, too caught in the family undertow herself, to offer more than fleeting solidarity. My life? It was a series of deferred dreams. The community college courses in drafting I'd wanted to take after high school? Sidelined when Dad's commission-based job took a nosedive and my paycheck from the hardware store became essential for the mortgage. The road trip I'd planned with friends, canceled because Lauren needed someone to co-sign yet another lease she couldn't afford. Even my quiet interest in woodworking, the few decent tools I'd inherited from my grandfather gathering dust. In the garage, felt like a frivolous indulgence I couldn't justify when there were always more pressing family needs. My energy was consumed by anticipating their problems, fixing their mistakes, and managing the delicate ecosystem of their expectations, all while holding down a soul-crushingly dull data entry job that paid just enough to keep me tethered. The resentment was a low hum beneath the surface, a constant companion I tried to ignore. "This is family," I told myself. "This is just what you do." Which brings us to the anniversary party. 35 years of Robert and Diane, a milestone demanding celebration, apparently involving half the neighborhood and relatives I barely recognized crammed into our backyard. And who was orchestrating it? Guess. From setting up the rented tables and stringing lights that morning, to grilling endless burgers and hot dogs under the blazing July sun, to refereeing my nephew's attempts to turn the sprinkler into a water weapon. That was me. Invisible Ethan, making sure everyone else had a perfect day. As dusk settled, Dad, fueled by a few beers and the glow of being the center of attention, tapped his glass for a toast. Mom stood beside him, basking in the reflected glory. The usual. Platitudes followed. Love, partnership, enduring commitment. Then came the kicker. "And to celebrate properly," Robert announced, his voice booming with manufactured bonhomie, "Diane and I decided one party isn't enough. So next week—" He paused, milking the suspense. "We're taking the whole family on a little celebratory trip." A murmur of excitement went through the crowd. My siblings leaned forward. "We're flying to Aspen," he declared. "Got a couple of condos right near the slopes for a full week. Skiing, hot tubs, the works." Genuine cheers this time. Daniel whooped. Lauren squealed. The grandkids started chanting, "Snow, snow!" Even I felt a jolt, a flicker of disbelief. Aspen? A real vacation? Not just a weekend fixing their gutters, but an actual trip together? Maybe this was it. The acknowledgement. The reward for all those years. Wiping sweat and grease. From my forehead, I stepped forward, trying to sound casual despite the sudden pounding in my chest. "Wow, Dad, that sounds incredible. What are the exact dates? I'll need to put in for the time off work right away." A simple question. The kind any son would ask. But the air changed instantly. The smile slid off Robert's face, replaced by that familiar look, the one that said I'd overstepped, presumed too much. The backyard seemed to fall silent around us, the casual confidence in my question. "What are the exact dates? I'll need to put in for the time off work right away," evaporated the instant I saw the shift in my father's eyes. That familiar flicker of impatience, the subtle tightening around his mouth that always signaled I'd somehow transgressed an unspoken boundary. The buoyant atmosphere of the party seemed to still around us, a pocket of sudden heavy silence amidst the general. "Backyard, then." Robert's smile, the one he wore for neighbors and distant relatives, didn't just fade. It was retracted, replaced by a look that measured me, weighed me, and found me wanting. "You don't need to worry about that, Ethan," he said, and the casual dismissal in his tone was a colder slap than any raised voice. He didn't lower his volume. He didn't pull me aside. He made the pronouncement for the benefit of anyone close enough to hear, my siblings, their spouses, a couple of aunts hovering nearby. "This trip," he continued, drawing out the words, ensuring the distinction landed, "is for the core family. Core." The word hung there, sharp and ugly. It defined a circle, drawing a clear, deliberate line in the grass of the backyard, and I was suddenly, irrevocably, on the outside. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. He wasn't finished. Leaning forward slightly, dropping his voice just enough to make it seem like an intimate clarification but ensuring the inner circle heard, he added almost thoughtfully, "You're not really part of that circle, are you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a definition delivered with the chilling finality of a gavel strike. Years of feeling peripheral, of being the dependable outsider who kept the insiders comfortable, coalesced into that single, brutal moment. It wasn't just about missing a ski trip to Aspen. It was about being fundamentally unclassified, unacknowledged, as belonging to the very unit I had spent my life propping up. Time seemed to warp. I saw the scene unfold as if in slow motion. My mother, Diane, ever the smooth diplomat of dysfunction, stepped in not to defend, but to seal the verdict. "Oh, Robert, don't be like that," she chirped, a laugh tinkling falsely in the tense air as she waved a perfectly manicured hand. Her eyes, however, held no warmth, only a sharp agreement with her husband. She turned that brittle smile on me. "Ethan understands. It's just practical, really. Someone needs to stay back, look after the house, feed Mittens." Mittens. The cat I was allergic to, whose shedding fur clung to everything, a constant low-grade irritant mirroring my place in the household. "You don't mind, do you, dear?" Her voice dripped with faux concern. "You're such a homebody anyway. You never liked skiing." A lie. I'd loved the one time I'd gone years ago, before family finances became Ethan's problem. But my actual preferences, my actual self, had never been relevant. Only my function mattered. I scanned the faces around me, searching for a lifeline, a flicker of dissent. Daniel, my older brother, suddenly found the condensation on his beer bottle utterly fascinating. Lauren's gaze darted away, her hand immediately going to fuss with her daughter's hair ribbon. Jessica simply looked through me, her expression blank. The aunts nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances and took a sudden interest in the wilting flower centerpiece. Only Chloe, my youngest sister, caught my eye. Her face was pale, her teenage features crumpled with a confusion and hurt that mirrored my own. She opened her mouth, a protest forming, but Mom placed a subtle, warning hand on her arm, and Chloe subsided, biting her lip, her gaze dropping to the ground. That small, crushed gesture of solidarity, instantly snuffed out, hurt almost as much as the initial blow. It confirmed the power dynamic, the unspoken rules. Keep Ethan in his place. Don't rock the boat. The silence from the rest of them was deafening. It was agreement. It was acceptance. It was confirmation that Robert had merely voiced what they all, on some level, believed or were willing to accept. I was useful, but not integral. Present, but not truly belonging. The foundation was necessary, but you didn't invite it on vacation. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just crack, it sheared clean through. The years of swallowed resentment, of quiet sacrifices, of hoping that this time they'd see me, this time they'd value me, it all collapsed. There was no anger left, not yet. Just a vast, hollow space where obligation used to reside. A cold, clear certainty settled in its place. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the truth of my position, laid bare under the string of cheerful party lights. I looked down at the barbecue tongs I was still holding, their metal cool against my suddenly numb fingers. They felt heavy, alien, symbols of service, of a role I would no longer play. With a quiet finality that seemed to echo louder than any shout, I let them drop. They clattered onto the hot grill, a sharp, metallic sound against the background. Murmur of the oblivious party guests further down the lawn. Then I turned. I didn't offer explanations or excuses. I didn't wait for arguments or attempts at placation. I simply walked, past the suddenly awkward huddle of my core family, past the chattering relatives, towards the porch where my old denim jacket hung. Ethan. "Hey, where are you going?" It was Lauren, her voice thin with belated performative concern. I didn't break stride. I pulled on my jacket, the familiar weight settling on my shoulders like an old skin I was about to shed. I pushed open the screen door. The rusty spring groaned in protest before the door slammed shut behind me, the sound sharp, decisive. A period at the end of a very long, very draining sentence. My truck keys felt solid in my hand as I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my boots. I didn't look back at the house, at the warm lights spilling onto the lawn, at the life contained within that I had just irrevocably stepped out of. The engine turned over, a familiar rumble in the quiet street. As I pulled away, heading towards a future I couldn't yet imagine, only one thought echoed with absolute clarity. You're not one of us. Fine. Then I would be one of me. Alone, perhaps. But finally, undeniably, me. The miles unspooled under the worn tires of my pickup, each one a small victory against the undertow threatening to pull me back. Leaving felt less like a decision and more like a reflex, the only possible response to having the ground dissolve beneath my feet. The initial shock from my father's words had subsided, leaving behind a landscape of raw hurt and a bewildering sense of emptiness. Where the constant weight of family obligation had been, there was now just space. Terrifying, liberating space. Driving through the pre-dawn darkness, away from the familiar grid of suburban Chicago streets, I felt like an astronaut cut loose from the mothership, drifting into the void. What now? The question hammered at me with every rotation of the engine. Go back? Apologize? For what? For existing? For needing a place to belong? No. That door had slammed shut, not just by their words, but by the sudden, stark clarity they provided. I wasn't part of their equation, except as a resource. Accepting that truth felt like swallowing glass, but it was also strangely bracing. My mind drifted back years ago to a brief road trip I'd taken, hauling furniture for one of Daniel's failed ventures, naturally. We'd passed through Portland, Maine on the way back. I only spent maybe half a day there wandering the old port while Daniel haggled over something else, but the city had lodged itself in my memory. The working harbor wasn't picturesque in a postcard way. It was gritty, real, smelling of salt and brine and honest labor. The old brick buildings seemed sturdy, defiant against the Atlantic winds. There was an energy there, a blend of history and hustle, independence etched into the very cobblestones. It felt like a place where you could disappear and reinvent yourself, where your past didn't cling to you like harbor fog. Portland. The name echoed in the cavernous space inside me. It wasn't a plan, not really. It was just a direction. North. Towards the coast. Towards something unknown. Something potentially mine. The journey was a blur of interstate highways, cheap motels smelling of stale smoke, and gas station coffee that tasted like battery acid. I drove until exhaustion forced me to pull over, slept fitfully in the truck or in dingy rooms, then drove again. I didn't call anyone. I couldn't. Explaining felt impossible. Justifying felt weak. This severance had to be clean, absolute, at least for now. Rolling into Portland felt like surfacing for air after being underwater for too long. The city was alive in a way my hometown never was. Seagulls screamed overhead. The rhythmic clang of shipyard work echoed across the water. Foghorns moaned out on Casco Bay. The air was sharp, clean, carrying the briny tang of the ocean. People moved with purpose, fishermen heading out, chefs hauling crates of produce, artists sketching by the waterfront. It was overwhelming, invigorating, and blessedly anonymous. No one here knew me. No one expected anything from me. Reality, however, demanded practicality. My savings were a joke, barely enough to cover a security deposit. Panic started to set in. I found a listing online for a small studio apartment in an old Victorian house converted into rentals up on Munjoy Hill. The climb up the steep streets left me breathless, but the view from the top overlooking the harbor and the islands beyond was worth it. The apartment itself was tiny. A single room with a kitchenette tucked into one corner, a bathroom down the hall shared with two other tenants, and paint generously described as distressed. The radiator hissed ominously. But the window looked out over rooftops towards the water, and the rent was borderline manageable. Character, the weary-looking landlord had called it, felt more like benign neglect, but it was a space, a start. I handed over most of my cash for the deposit and first month's rent. The silence in that room was absolute. No TV droning in. The background, no footsteps overhead, no phone ringing with the latest family crisis. It was just me and the unfamiliar sounds of a new city filtering through the thin walls. Loneliness washed over me, cold and immense. Had I made a colossal mistake? But self-pity wasn't a luxury I could afford. The next morning, I hit the pavement. I needed work, any work, immediately. I started down by the docks, figuring my willingness to do physical labor might count for something. Bars, restaurants, supply shops, rejection after rejection. Not hiring. Need experience. Come back later. Discouragement began to gnaw at me. Then I saw it. The salty dog, a cramped, Bustling cafe jammed between a marine supply store and a dive bar, steam fogging its windows even on a cool morning. A handwritten help wanted sign was taped inside. I pushed through the door into a wall of noise. Clattering dishes, shouting orders, the hiss of an espresso machine. Sal, the owner, a man perpetually wiping sweat from his brow, sized me up in half a second. "Dishwasher quit. You know how to work?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "Good enough. 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." Aprons in the back. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a career. It was survival. But as I walked out, the promise of that first meager paycheck felt like finding solid ground after drifting at sea. The next morning, plunged into the chaotic ballet of the breakfast rush. I met Maya. She commanded the register and the swirling storm of takeout orders with a focused intensity, her tattooed arms a blur as she bagged pastries and barked names. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, especially my fumbling attempts to manage 3 coffee orders at once. "You're gonna need to move faster than molasses in January, new guy," she said without looking up, shoving a ticket towards me. "These guys don't wait." "Trying," I grunted, nearly spilling a latte. She finally glanced up, a small smirk playing on her lips. "Try harder, or learn to swim. Dock workers get cranky without their caffeine." Her directness, devoid of pity or judgment, was strangely refreshing. Over the next few weeks, amidst the clatter and steam, we found a rhythm. She'd offer curt tips. "Wipe down the milk pitcher before it crusts over, genius." And I'd fire back. "Sarcasm. Pretty sure decaf soy latte is against harbor regulations." It wasn't deep conversation, but it was connection. Human connection. Something I hadn't realized how starved for I was. She was pure Portland, tough, practical, no nonsense, but with an undercurrent of dry humor. She didn't ask about my story, and I didn't offer it. In the noisy anonymity of the salty dog, I was just Ethan, the new guy trying to keep up. And for now, that felt like enough. It felt like a promise. The initial adrenaline rush of escape began to fade, replaced by the steady, unglamorous rhythm of survival in Portland. Days started before dawn at the Salty Dog, the clang of the bell above the door and the hiss of the espresso machine becoming the soundtrack to my life. Evenings were spent either catching up on sleep that always felt insufficient or simply walking, letting the unfamiliar streets of Munjoy Hill and the waterfront soak into my bones. The loneliness was a constant hum beneath the surface, a dull ache reminding me of the ties I'd severed, but it was preferable to the choking weight of my old life. There was a stark honesty to my current existence. Work, pay rent, eat, repeat. No expectations, no demands beyond showing up on time and getting the coffee orders right. Maya remained a fixed point in the cafe chaos. Our banter evolved from sharp jabs to something resembling actual friendship. She'd share stories about ridiculous customers, complain about her landlord, and occasionally drag me out for a cheap beer after work at some dive bar down by the docks. She never asked about my past, never pushed for details about why a guy clearly capable of more was wiping tables. Her acceptance was unspoken but deeply felt. A quiet acknowledgement that everyone carries baggage, and some stories aren't meant for casual conversation. It was a relief I hadn't known I needed. My explorations of the city often led me down side streets, past warehouses and old industrial buildings. It was on one of these walks, trying to clear my head after a particularly grueling shift, that I stumbled upon it, a community woodworking space tucked into a converted brick mill near the Fore River. The sign was unassuming, but the sound drifting out, the rhythmic scrape of a hand plane, the whine of a table saw, and the rich, earthy smell of sawdust pulled me in like a magnet. Peering through the dusty window, I saw people bent over workbenches, transforming rough lumber into things of purpose, of beauty. An old feeling stirred within me, the ghost of that boy who used to tinker in his grandfather's garage, the one who'd been buried under years of being the fixer. That forgotten stool I'd repaired in my apartment sat as a quiet testament. On impulse, driven by a need I couldn't quite articulate, I went inside. The air was thick with the scent of pine and cherry and something else, potential. The place wasn't fancy, just a large, open room filled with sturdy workbenches, serious-looking, machinery, and stacks of lumber. A sign listed a monthly membership fee for access to the tools and space. It was a stretch for my budget, but the pull was irresistible. I signed up that day. Learning to work with wood became my salvation. It started tentatively. I claimed a corner workbench, bought a few basic hand tools from a second-hand shop, and began experimenting with scrap wood left by other members. My first attempts were laughable. Joints didn't line up, finishes were blotchy, designs were clumsy. There were splinters, frustrations, moments where I wanted to throw a piece across the room. But unlike fixing my family's endless stream of problems, here, the effort felt different. It was focused. It was mine. The wood didn't demand or complain. It simply responded to my hands, patiently revealing its character, its flaws, its possibilities. The process itself became a form of meditation. The concentration required to guide a saw along a precise line, the rhythmic motion of sanding wood smooth, the satisfaction of fitting two pieces together perfectly. It quieted the noise in my head. It grounded me in the physical present, away from the ghosts of the past and the anxieties of the future. I wasn't just killing time. I was creating something tangible, something real, born from my own effort. I built a small, sturdy bookshelf. For my apartment, each joint a small victory. I found a discarded end table by the roadside, its leg broken, its surface scarred, and painstakingly brought it back to life, revealing the beautiful grain hidden beneath the grime. The workshop was overseen unofficially by Marcus. He was older, maybe late 60s, with hands like weathered oak burls, and eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. He was a master craftsman, a furniture restorer whose work occasionally appeared in local galleries. He didn't offer easy praise. He'd wander by my bench, observe in silence, then point with a scarred finger. "Grain's fighting you there, Ethan. Flip it." Or, "Too much pressure on the chisel. Let the tool do the work." His critiques were blunt, sometimes humbling, but always accurate. He wasn't teaching me steps. He was teaching me to see, to feel, to respect the material. Gradually, a quiet understanding developed between us. He saw my dedication, the hours I poured in, the slow improvement. A curt nod from Marcus after I successfully executed a difficult joint felt like winning an award. One evening, my phone buzzed while I was carefully applying finish to a set of shelves. It was Chloe. My stomach tightened. "Hey," the text read. "Mom's asking about you again, trying to act casual, but she's stressed. The Aspen trip didn't happen. Dad wouldn't pay for sitters after you left, and everyone blamed each other. It was a mess. Hope you're okay." I read the message twice. A small, bitter satisfaction flickered. The chaos I'd predicted had come to pass. But it was quickly followed by a pang of guilt, picturing Chloe navigating that minefield. I owed her more than silence, but I couldn't offer false hope or step back into the fray. "I'm okay, Chloe," I typed carefully. "Really okay. Building something new here. Sorry things are messy there. It wasn't about you." I hesitated, then added, "Tell me about school." Her reply shifted to homework and friends, the tone lighter. We texted back and forth for a bit, keeping it focused on her world. When I finally put the phone down, the sadness lingered, but the resolve held firm. This new life, this fragile sense of self I was carving out, needed protection. It needed distance. I turned back to the shelves, running my hand over the smooth, finished wood. It felt solid, real. Unlike the shifting dynamics and emotional quicksand of my family, this was something I could understand, something I could shape. My hands, once just tools for fixing their broken things, were now learning to create. And in that creation, I was slowly, steadily, creating myself anew. The seasons turned in Portland, bringing with them a tangible shift not just in the weather but within me. Summer's frantic energy gave way to the crisp clarity of autumn, and then the introspective quiet of winter settled over the city. Close to a year had passed since I'd driven away from that backyard party, away from the life that had defined and confined me. The salty dog remained my steady paycheck, but increasingly my real hours were spent at the community workshop, amidst the scent of pine shavings and linseed oil. Under Marcus's watchful eye and occasional pointed guidance, my hands had learned a new language. Woodworking wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was becoming a craft, a calling. I'd graduated from simple repairs to designing and building small pieces, bookshelves, end tables, intricate jewelry boxes made from reclaimed local timber. Encouraged by Maya, I'd started selling them at the weekend Portland Flea-for-All market down by the waterfront. The first time someone, a complete stranger, admired a small maple box I'd made and handed over cash for it, the feeling was electric. It wasn't about the money, which was modest. It was the validation. Someone valued something I had created, something born from my own vision and effort, not from obligation or duty. My small apartment reflected the change. Sketches for furniture designs were tacked to the walls, tools were neatly organized, and finished pieces waiting for delivery occupied precious floor space. It was still simple, still small, but it felt unequivocally mine. I was paying my own rent, buying my own groceries, making my own decisions. The quiet hum of anxiety about survival had faded, replaced by the focused energy of building something. Maya had become a fixture, our easy banter evolving into late-night talks over cheap pizza, hikes along the rocky coast, and a comfortable companionship that felt blessedly uncomplicated. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. I was in the workshop one chilly November afternoon, carefully measuring a cut on a piece of cherry wood destined to become a commissioned rocking chair, my biggest project yet, when the familiar rumble of a specific sedan engine outside made the fine hairs on my neck stand up. I glanced through the large, dusty window. My heart seized. It was my father's car, impossibly parked right there on the industrial side street. I took a slow, steadying breath, laid down my saw, and wiped the sawdust from my hands onto my jeans. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He just appeared. Like he always assumed he had the right to. I stepped outside into the cool air as Robert unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He looked thinner, grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. He surveyed the unassuming workshop building, then me, his expression unreadable but tinged with something like disapproval. "Ethan," he said, his voice rough, foregoing any pleasantries. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone even, leaning against the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" He shoved his hands into his pockets, shifting his weight. "Had some business up this way," he lied unconvincingly. "Thought I'd see how you were." "I'm fine," I said simply. He looked past me into the workshop, at the stacks of lumber, the tools hanging on the walls, the half-finished rocking chair on my bench. "Still doing this?" The dismissal in his tone was faint but unmistakable. This, the thing that was giving me purpose, the craft I was pouring my soul into, reduced to a vague, questionable activity. "Yeah, Dad, still doing this. It's called woodworking. It's my work now." He grunted, turning his gaze back to me. "Look, your mother, she worries. She hasn't been herself since, well, since you left." The guilt card. Played early. "Things at home aren't right, Ethan. Daniel's having money trouble again. Lauren's latest relationship just blew up. It's chaos. We need—" He hesitated, the word catching in his throat. "We need you there." The air crackled between us. Need, not want. Not regret for how they'd treated me. Just the same old reliance on me to be the solution to their self-inflicted problems. The old Ethan would have felt the familiar tug, the ingrained urge to step in, smooth things over, sacrifice his own needs once again. But the man standing here now, smelling of sawdust and turpentine, grounded by the solid weight of the tools, in his hands and the life he was building was different. "No," I said again, the word even easier this time. Calmer. "You don't need me, Dad. You need a system that doesn't rely on one person carrying the load for everyone else. You need Daniel and Lauren to figure out their own lives. You need Mom to manage her own anxieties without making them my responsibility." He bristled, his face darkening. "Don't you talk about your mother like that. We did everything for you." "Did you?" I met his glare, holding it steady. "Did you do everything when you told me I wasn't part of the core family? When you expected me to put my life on hold indefinitely to serve yours? When you valued my function as a fixer more than my existence as a son?" I gestured towards the bow workshop. "I came here with almost nothing because you decided I didn't belong, and I built this. This is my life now. It's not glamorous, it's not what you planned for me, but it's real, and it's mine. And I'm not giving it up to go back, to being your unpaid handyman and emotional punching bag." He seemed genuinely stunned into silence. Perhaps for the first time in his life, truly hearing the impact of his own words reflected back at him. He looked at my hands, calloused now not just from repairs, but from creation. He looked at the quiet confidence in my stance. He looked at the half-finished rocking chair, a thing of potential beauty emerging from raw material. He saw, perhaps not the dutiful boy he expected, but a man he didn't know how to control. "Family is supposed to stick together," he finally mumbled, the argument weak, reflexive. "Sticking together shouldn't mean one person gets suffocated," I replied quietly. "I needed space to breathe, Dad. To figure out who I am outside of that house, outside of what you all needed me to be." He didn't have a response. He just stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the workshop, a saw starting up in the distance, the scrape of sandpaper filling the silence. He looked smaller somehow, the bluster gone, replaced by a weary confusion. He had come expecting to reel me back in with the old lures of guilt and duty, and found the line had been cut. I guess I'll be going then," he said finally, turning abruptly towards his car. He didn't look back. I watched him drive away, the rumble of his engine fading down the street. My heart was pounding, a residual tremor from the confrontation, but beneath it was a deep, quiet calm. The final reckoning had come, not with shouting or tears, but with the steady assertion of my own hard-won space. There was sadness, yes, a grief for the relationship we never had, for the family that could have been. But there was no regret, only the solid certainty that I was finally, truly standing on my own ground. I turned, took a deep breath of the sawdust-scented air, and walked back into the workshop. There was work to be done. My work. My father driving away felt less like an ending and more like a clearing. The confrontation, though draining, had swept away the last vestiges of lingering doubt and obligation. Standing there in the cool Portland air, surrounded by the comforting scent of sawdust, I knew with bone-deep certainty that I couldn't and wouldn't go back. The path ahead was still uncertain in many ways, but it was mine to navigate, mine to build, and my hands, once solely occupied with fixing the broken pieces of my family's lives, were now itching to create something whole, something new, something entirely my own. That resolve fueled me. I threw myself into the woodworking with a renewed intensity that surprised even myself. The near-constant hum of anxiety that had been my lifelong companion began to fade, replaced by the focused energy required to coax shape and beauty from raw timber. The workshop became my sanctuary, Marcus my quiet guide, and the wood itself my teacher. I learned to read the grain, to anticipate how a piece of cherry might curve, how stubborn oak demanded patience, how salvaged fir held stories in its knots and imperfections. The gallery showcase, small as it was, had opened a door. The woman with the sharp glasses and expensive scarf, the hotel owner, followed through. We met, discussed designs, and I found myself signing a contract for a commission that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Crafting several unique, high-quality pieces, benches, console tables, mirror frames, for the lobby and select suites of her boutique hotel renovation in the Old Port. It was a leap, a significant step up from market crafts and personal projects. It demanded more skill, more time, more investment than anything I'd done before. Failure felt like a tangible risk, but the opportunity, it was the kind of chance I'd never even allowed myself to dream of back in my old life. The hotel project consumed me for the next few months. Long hours turned into longer ones. My small apartment became cluttered with sketches, wood samples, and finish tests. The workshop was my second home. There were moments of intense frustration. A joint that wouldn't align, a finish that blotched, a design that looked better on paper than in reality. But unlike the soul-crushing frustration of dealing with my family's endless, unfixable dramas, these challenges felt productive. They were problems to be solved, skills to be mastered. Marcus offered crucial advice, often with just a grunt, and a pointed look at a misaligned angle, forcing me to find the solution myself. Maya brought me coffee during late nights at the workshop, offering encouragement and a much-needed dose of perspective. "Don't burn out, Ethan," she'd say, leaning against a workbench, watching me meticulously sand a tabletop. "The hotel can wait an extra day if it means you don't collapse." Her presence was a quiet anchor. Our friendship had deepened into something more, an easy companionship that felt natural and unforced. We weren't rushing anything, just enjoying the shared moments, the understanding that passed between us without needing many words. It was another piece of this new life, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a stark contrast to the conditional relationships I'd left behind. Finally, the day came to deliver the finished pieces to the hotel, seeing them installed. The smooth, glowing finish of the cherrywood console table reflecting the lobby lights, the sturdy elegance of the reclaimed oak benches, the intricate detail on the mirror frames, filled me with a profound sense of pride I'd never experienced before. These weren't just objects, they were proof. Proof of my skill, my dedication, my ability to create something beautiful and lasting from raw potential. The hotel owner was thrilled, her praise genuine and effusive. She paid promptly and spoke of future collaborations. Walking out of that renovated historic building back onto the cobblestone streets of the Old Port, I felt 10 feet tall. That evening, my phone pinged. A text from Chloe. It was just a photo. A slightly blurry selfie of the whole clan, minus me, bundled in bright ski jackets, goggles pushed up on their heads, squinting against the glare of sun on snow. Behind them rose the unmistakable peaks of Aspen. "Made it this year," the caption read, followed by a slightly forced-looking smiley face. I looked at the photo for a long moment. There was a flicker, a faint echo of the sting from that anniversary party, but it faded almost instantly. They were there. They had managed without me. They looked like a family on vacation, a family I was no longer obligated to serve or save. A wave of complex emotion washed over me. Not sadness, not anger, not even relief exactly. Just acceptance. A quiet acknowledgement of the separate paths we were now on. "Looks cold," I texted back, adding a snowflake emoji, just as I had in my earlier thoughts. "Have fun. Be safe." Her reply came quickly. "Freezing. It's okay. Different without you. Glad you're doing well, though. Saw pics of your stuff Maya posted. Looks amazing." A small smile touched my lips. "Thanks, Chloe. Means a lot. You take care, too." That simple exchange felt like closing a chapter. Not slamming the book shut, perhaps, but turning the page with a sense of peace. They were living their lives, and I was living mine. The distance was real, necessary, and finally, okay. Life in Portland continued its steady rhythm, but now with a deeper sense of purpose. The hotel commission led to more inquiries, more projects. I started saving seriously, dreaming of a larger workshop space, maybe even my own small storefront someday. Maya and I spent weekends exploring the Maine coast, hiking wooded trails, sharing quiet dinners. Marcus still offered gruff wisdom over the whine of the lathe. I was building not just furniture, but a community, a chosen family bound by shared passions and mutual respect. Sometimes late at night in the workshop, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the scent of wood, I'd pause and reflect. The journey hadn't been easy. The scars from my past were still there, faint lines tracing the shape of old hurts. But they no longer defined me. The Ethan who had felt invisible, trapped, and resentful was gone, sanded away like rough edges on timber. In his place stood someone stronger, quieter, more deliberate. Someone who understood that true belonging wasn't about fitting into a pre-assigned role, but about having the courage to carve out your own space, to build your own future, piece by your own hands. The sound of the waves crashing against the nearby shore was a constant reminder. Life kept moving, and so would I, crafting my future one day, one project, one choice at a time. And for the first time, that future felt boundless. Ethan's story is a powerful testament to the difficult but ultimately liberating journey of self-discovery that can begin when the roles assigned to us no longer fit, or worse, actively diminish us. We saw him start as the quintessential dutiful son, the invisible engine keeping his family running, sacrificing his own dreams and well-being for a belonging that proved tragically conditional. The raw humiliation of being publicly cast aside by his own father, deemed not part of the core family at a moment meant for celebration, became the unexpected catalyst for profound change. His escape wasn't just a flight from pain, but a courageous step into the terrifying unknown, choosing anonymity and hardship in Portland, Maine, over the suffocating comfort of his familiar cage. Through the grind of survival jobs, the sting of loneliness, and the tentative forging of new connections with people like Maya and Marcus, Ethan began the arduous process of rebuilding. It wasn't glamorous. It was marked by struggle and self-doubt. Yet, in rediscovering a forgotten passion for woodworking, he found more than just a hobby or a potential career. He found a way to reclaim his hands, his focus, and his sense of self-worth. Shaping wood became a metaphor for shaping his own life, taking raw, sometimes damaged material and patiently, skillfully bringing forth its inherent beauty and strength. The confrontation with his father wasn't about revenge. It was a necessary reckoning, a final assertion of his hard-won independence and the boundaries he now refused to let be crossed. His eventual success, marked by local recognition and the quiet pride in his craft, wasn't defined by his family's approval or disapproval, but by his own internal measure of growth and fulfillment. He arrived at a place of peace, accepting the distance from his family not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows his own value. The deepest lesson here, perhaps, speaks to anyone who feels trapped by expectation or defined solely by their function within a family or relationship. Ethan's journey teaches us that our worth isn't contingent on the roles others assign us or the sacrifices we make for their approval. True belonging starts with belonging to ourselves. It's about having the courage to recognize when a dynamic is harming us, even if it involves people we love, and finding the strength to choose our own well-being. Sometimes this means setting firm boundaries. Other times it requires the painful but necessary act of creating distance to allow space for authentic growth. It reminds us that reclaiming our passions, investing in relationships built on mutual respect, and having the tenacity to build a life aligned with our own values, however. Challenging is not selfish. It's essential for a fulfilling existence. Ask yourself, are your relationships reciprocal? Are you valued for who you are, or just for what you do? Finding the answers and acting on them is where true independence begins. If Ethan's story resonated with you, if you found inspiration in his journey of breaking free and rebuilding, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to keep bringing powerful stories like this to light, reminding us all of the strength we hold within ourselves. Hit that subscribe button, join our community, and let's continue exploring these compelling narratives together.